The election of 2000 was very close, one of the closest in modern US history. And for that reason, it was also very controversial. Democratic candidate Vice President Al Gore faced off against Republican candidate Texas Governor George W. Bush, the son of the president before the then incumbent Bill Clinton. On election night, results were too close to call for several hours in the state of Florida, where Bush's younger brother Jeb coincidentally was the governor of. The focus shifted almost exclusively to this state for the next several weeks over its complicated recounting process. Tensions flared, tempers boiled, butterflies blew, chads were examined, and the country was severely divided. It was a wonder, but also a testament to the strength of our country's democracy, that the eventual result was peacefully conceded by the loser Gore to the victor Bush. In the end, Bush won the presidency without winning the popular vote, as Gore led by over 500,000, a phenomenon which has only occurred a few times before in American history. Bush won Florida by a few hundred votes, and that's all that mattered. During the general election campaign season, Republican candidate Bush called himself a compassionate conservative, in response to the common criticism that conservative economic policies help only the rich at the expense of the poor. Bush wanted to rally support from the working classes that weren't particularly religious, unlike those from the South, a region favoring Bush for his socially conservative policies on abortion, gay marriage, gun rights, stem cells, etc. Bush campaigned to tone back the American foreign policy, criticizing the Clinton administration for meddling too much in world affairs. He disliked the nation-building, such as in the Balkans, where devastating Yugoslav wars following the breakup of that communist country ravaged the southeastern European region throughout the 90s. In retrospect, we almost laugh at this because Bush involved himself in two Middle Eastern wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, but that is after the surprise attack on 9/11, for which Bush initiated his war on terror. One of the major issues over that election was how to use the hundreds of millions of dollar budget surplus, almost imaginable to people today with our government's massive deficits from Iraq, mission not accomplished and no weapons of mass destruction, Afghanistan, and the Great Recession. As a Republican, Bush promised tax breaks for all to bring all that money back into the hands of the people, which was greatly appealing. On the other side, Gore campaigned on a new Democratic platform to gain more moderate and independent votes, but remained as liberal as possible apart from economic policy to maintain support from the Democrats. For example, he supported integrating gays and lesbians into the American society, but not yet marriage. Though he supported tough punishments for crime, including the death penalty, he opposed police use of racial profiling. Gore hoped to balance the budget by 2012. Through sound fiscal planning, including some tax cuts for the working class, but not as broad as Bush's more appealing plan. Perhaps one of Gore's most memorable plans was the use of a novel Medicare lockbox, where Medicare payroll taxes would be used only for Medicare and paying off the debt, as part of his broader plan of strengthening Medicare and Social Security and using the budget surplus liberally as necessary. The lockbox is called that because money there would be off limits to budget changes and politicians, ensuring all the money will help prepare the baby boom generation for retirement. Polls leading up to the election were very close, so interest and apprehension were high. The media's blunder over the election night coverage did not help. Several television networks such as CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, CNN, etc., erroneously made premature decisions over the outcome of Florida, calling the state for Bush, Gore before returning to too close to call. These networks infuriated some watchers and perhaps even kept some voters home, thinking that they would no longer need to vote because the decision had already been made. Except that the news networks were wrong for declaring results too early. Gee, no wonder why people don't trust the media. One peculiarity over the state of Florida is that it contains two time zones, Eastern and Central. Most of the state falls under Eastern Time, but the westernmost panhandle counties fall under Central Time, and tend to be Republican voting. The TV channels mistakenly, some claim intentionally, announced that all polls in Florida were closed at a certain hour, when in truth the Central Time counties' polls were still open. Voters watching the television in the Panhandle may have mistakenly assumed their polls had closed and they could no longer go to vote, when in truth the polls were open for another hour, potentially resulting in a large loss of Republican votes. The election in Florida became the centerpiece as the question of who would become president hinged on its results. However, initial results of Bush's 1,800 vote lead were too small to be confirmed, and an automatic machine recount was mandated for such minute margins. While that was happening, voting irregularities surfaced. One major issue over the election, or more like post-election now, was a so-called butterfly ballot in large and Democratic-leading Palm Beach County of Florida. Most ballots for president occupy one page, but to help the county's large proportion of senior citizens, the ballot was enlarged to 2 pages for easier viewing. However, the candidates were staggered left and right, which left up to thousands of Gore-intending voters to accidentally cast their ballots for Reform Party candidate Pat Buchanan, a paleoconservative. The result, which Buchanan even agrees to, is that Gore received up to 3,000 votes fewer than he could have due to this poor ballot design. Democrats everywhere wanted a revote in this county, but that was blocked by equal protection arguments. Opinion towards this issue were divided along party lines. Democrats believed these voters should be given a second chance and excused because of the poor ballot design. Republicans retorted that the voters were too stupid to follow a fairly simple ballot whose directions were even given at the polling station but evidently ignored, and therefore they don't deserve to get their intended vote. Indeed, the final result over this issue was that the ballots, while poorly designed, did not effectively disenfranchise voters, a claim exaggerated by some Democrats. The directions clearly stated that after voting you should examine your ballot to make sure it's free of errors, and if a mistake was made, just ask for another one. Due to such irregularities, the Gore campaign requested manual recounts to be done in 4 counties. Old punch card voting was still used in some counties back in 2000, in which the voter had to use a pointed stylus to punch a hole through a card, their ballot. Many times the piece of paper that was supposed to be punched out was not completely punched out, and this piece of paper came to be known as a chad. Such ballots were not counted by the tallying machine, creating undervotes and signaling the need for a manual recount. The problem with this method is that it is difficult to equate some peculiar marks and conditions of the punch card to voter intent, which is why many Republicans had a problem with the manual recount and poll workers trying to determine a voter's intent without the voter actually being there. It is also difficult to standardize what should constitute a vote or not. Should only cleanly punched through chads be considered a vote? How about chads that are barely dangling on one corner of the hole but still attached to the ballot, called hanging chads? What about chads that were punched out in 2 corners but still attached to 2 others like a door and its hinges? Or chads that were still attached at all 4 corners of the square hole but obviously had been dented out by the stylus, called a pregnant chad? Or chads that were completely attached but had a small dent or mark by the stylus point, called a dimpled chad? Well, tell me! And it's difficult, not just to standardize the method, but also even agreeing upon what categories a chad would fall under by different viewers. One man could claim there's a barely visible hole, while another could disagree. Repeat this tedious process of eye squinting and organizing for thousands of ballots, and you'll get a very tired person who may not be recounting accurately. These poll workers, ordinary citizens, took up a big job with hard work. Their efforts are often reviled, but should actually be praised for volunteering to go through this process of manually recounting thousands of undervoted ballots. Let me honor this hard-working fellow. Another issue was centered on Gore's hypocrisy through the overseas absentee ballot controversy in Florida. Gore has always wanted to count every vote for the sake of our democracy and its noble values. What exactly are overseas absentee ballots? They are votes casted by people living abroad, such as the military. The military tends to favor Republicans, as the Democrats tend to be the Dove Party and would be keener on cutting the defense budget, which would cost these soldiers their jobs. Another demographic that would use these mail-in ballots from outside of Florida would be wealthy families who have the money to live abroad and send their children to elite private schools in foreign countries, or to do business in tax havens and get even richer. Yeah, these people would obviously vote Republican too. So Gore thought he had a clever trick to deny the counting of these specific type of ballots, even as he wanted to count the normal in-state ballots. He reckoned that because you're supposed to have a stamp on your envelope, Votes without a postmark should not be counted and ignored. Needless to say, that did not go well for him, and the mail-ins were counted anyway, increasing Bush's lead. It wasn't just Gore being a hypocrite, though. Bush was too, and perhaps even more so. The Republicans are usually the party that prefers states' rights, which is why they're popular in the South, while the Democrats prefer a loose interpretation of the Constitution to expand the federal government. However, this election season was different. In order to win, some principles had to be sacrificed, and that's exactly what the Bush team did. If they genuinely were for states' rights, they'd accept the Florida Supreme Court's decision as final, respecting its order to conduct a statewide manual recount. But that probably would have led to a Gore victory in their minds, though it depends on the standard used for Chad counting. Bush couldn't take any chances with such a small lead in the hundreds compared to a total of almost 6 million votes cast in the state, so he appealed his case to the U.S. Supreme Court. With a majority of Republicans like then Chief Justice William Rehnquist, it was no surprise that Bush got his wish of halting the recount and securing his victory on equal protection arguments. The Supreme Court never intervened in a presidential election, and the justices said they will never again, as it'd be a dangerously undemocratic precedent, which only adds to the Democrats' anger as the only time the Supreme Court intervened was to help out the Republicans. Political divisions are everywhere, but that's what makes America America. In the end, our democracy stands. Unpopular though Bush's victory may have been to half of the American people, and especially 8 years later, they didn't take up arms and storm Crawford, Texas, and lynch Bush and Cheney. Nor did Republicans take up their hunting rifles and assault guns and fire upon the White House. Yep, America's A-OK. And you know it's gonna be that way. We'll be divided and have our political squabbles, but when it comes time to unite, we do, such as during 9/11. Remember 1800? That election went all the way to the House of Representatives. People were scared, as it was the first true testing of our democracy, a change in political party. So much could go wrong. People could easily get angry, rise up in rebellion, and declare the Federalist States of America, refusing to accept Jefferson's victory. Historians called it the Revolution of 1800 for a reason. We set a precedent about peaceful transfer of power and got over it. We got over it in 2000, and we'll get over it, hopefully, even if Donald Trump becomes president. Call him a sore loser or a weakling, but Gore made the right decision to concede and start focusing on unity over division when the time came after the Supreme Court decision.